Hello, Keith Rucker here at VintageMachinery.org. Well guys, I'm going to start a new little series here. It's going to probably take a couple of videos to get this done, but what I want to do is I've got this straight edge. This is an 18-inch King-Way Straightedge that I got from Richard King, who of course teaches our scraping classes. Richard sells these castings for Camelback Straightedges that he had made up in various links and stuff. If you're interested in that, you can check out his website at www.handscraping.com. Send him an email and he can probably hook you up with some, give you prices, what have you. But anyway, I've got an 18-inch one. This is one that I actually got from Richard sometime past. In fact, we had a class back in May. This is November now, so that's been, what, 6 months ago. And several of the students in that class had purchased the same one, and I actually did a video on machining these from the raw castings. Mine, I never actually scraped in. I had another project that I was working on during that class, and I fully intended to have done that between now and then, but as things usually happen, things got in the way, and it just never got done. So this has been sitting around here for a couple of months now, and I'm ready to go ahead and get this scraped in. In fact, I need to get this scraped in and flat and true and everything else to actually use over on my Monarch lathe to so that I can finish scraping in the saddle on that machine, getting the dovetails and everything done properly. So this is going to be the project, and like I said, it's been rough milled. We've taken the raw castings off. We have machine surfaces on here. It's been sitting for 6 months. It's probably moved around a little bit, and what I want to do before I start scraping it is let's go ahead and get this thing tuned in as close as possible. And to do that, we're going to come over to the surface grinder. So I'm going to grind these surfaces in first, which should get me pretty close, hopefully, so assuming my machine's doing a good job. And then we can take them over to the surface plate, blue things up, and actually scrape it in from there. So anyway, let's get going. So first things first, guys, before you get started on this, one thing that Richard really recommends you do is you want to go ahead and try to relieve any stresses in this straight edge that you can. Now, on his, he's already sent these out and had them heat treated. So basically, after they're cast, they're heated up and cooled down real slow, which is supposed to help relieve stresses in them. But after they've been machined, you've actually released some stresses in here. And he just recommends hanging this straight edge up and taking a hammer. I'm using a brass or bronze hammer here, and just ring it a few times. Well, hitting it with that hammer, what it's going to do is hopefully release any stresses inside of this that aren't already released. And with that done now, we're going to go put it on the surface grinder and go ahead and start grinding it in. We'll start by surfacing our wheel, getting a good fresh cut on here. Of course, anytime you start using the surface grinder, you just want to face that wheel off. And I'm using a pretty open and coarse wheel, which is good for cast iron. I'm just going to put my hand up here where I can feel the chips coming off of that blade. And now we'll go across it. And I'm going to down feed a little bit more, about another thousandth, and we'll freshen that up. We should have a good grind on that wheel to start. We're going to start by actually cutting the top of this flat. I've already milled that off again. This is going to be a surface that we use as a reference surface for the next step. So I'm not sure where this wheel's high at, so we're just going to bring it on down until we touch off and just kind of map it out. We're just sparking a little bit right there. I'm actually going to come up about 2 thousandths and just going to manually kind of go back and forth across this part and make sure that we're not crashing in somewhere else and all looks good. So let me pull out here. We'll go ahead and we're going to go in. We'll take a 2 thousandths pass. I want to get my air compressor set up where we can run some coolant on this too. All right, we got some mist going now. I think I got my stroke set pretty well. Let's go in here and see if we can grind this top. I'm just barely touching there, and it looks like I'm getting covered about halfway down across. It's off a little bit on either side. We'll go ahead and let this go through, and I will feed it down a few more thou, probably another thou, or yeah, probably 2 thou, I guess, and see if it'll clean up. All right, let's feed it down. Okay, well, I'm going to 1.5 thou and see what happens. First is direction. All right, let's give it another 1.5 thou. Come back across it again. That's going to be really close to cleaning it up. I'm making contact all the way across, but I can see a few of my milling marks in the bottoms there, so I'll probably take another little light pass after this one. Take another thou, and I think it'll clean up fine. We've got a good surface there on the top now. So the next thing I want to do is actually grind the straight edge, the flat bottom on this. And we're going to make it parallel to the small thin edge that we just ground. And it doesn't have to be perfectly parallel, it has to be perfectly flat when we get through. But because we are going up against such a narrow edge that we're going to be magging down on, what I've got is I've got some transfer blocks. Those in the back happen to be V blocks. I've got some regular ones here too. And I'm just going to put these up against this to kind of give it some stability to keep it from flipping over. Now these transfer blocks, the magnetism will actually go through them. So it's not just going to stick this down, but you'll actually get magnetic forces through this, and hopefully it'll not only be sticking down, but it'll be sticking to the part itself. And this should give it some stability and keep it from wanting to flip over. We turn the mag on, and you can see that's nice and solid. Now, in theory, I should be at the same height here as on this side as I was on the other with my wheel, because we just ground this basically the opposite side here. So we're going to come in here, turn on, and I'm just going to bring my part in, and we're just going to kind of fish around on here and make sure that nothing's high. So I'm barely touching there. Looks like it's got a little belly in it. Okay, I'm barely touching there. Taking off a little bit on this side, tense. All right, so I think what I'll do is we're just going to feed down about 1 thou, maybe 1.5 thou on this first pass, and we'll start our cycle. And it looks like it's hitting a little bit heavier on this side than this, but it's pretty well cleaning up all the way, well, not cleaning up, but it's touching all the way across. So hopefully won't take a whole lot more to get this flat. All right, I'm gonna go down another 1.5 thou. Feed back across this part. All right, so looking at this, we've cleaned up pretty much all the way across except for some scratch marks down on this end. So I'm gonna go another pass and hopefully that'll clean it up for good. I think that looks good. All right, so now we're grinding the back edge back here. This is off a little bit just simply because I don't really have a really good edge to line it up on. But we're going to get it square to this surface, to the face, and then we'll actually grind the angle on the other side where it'll be square to that as well, or fairly square to it. I think that's cleaned up all the way now. It looks good. So we'll go ahead after this finishes sparking out and take it off and do the angle. My final grind is going to be the dovetail edge here, which is at a 45-degree angle. So I've just got these setting on some 45-degree blocks. We got a nice solid setup here. I'm happy with that. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and touch off and grind these out. Hopefully you'll be able to see them. I got my arm coming up on this side just to make sure we have clearance under the spindle, plus so that I can see it and make sure we don't get over into the webbing. So let's get her done. And I'm taking my finished pass here, about 2/10 off, so just barely touching it, cleaning it on up. And we should have all of our grinding done. All right, we should be all finished up here. Well, the grinds look nice. Take them over to the surface plate in a little bit and check them out. But before I do, I'm just going to take a file and we're just going to kind of knock these corners down. There's some pretty nasty, sharp corners on here, and I really don't want to get cut by this thing. It feels much better. Same thing on this back edge. Now this dovetail edge, you don't want it to be so sharp it'll cut you, so I'm going to take it on down a little bit because this it was pretty much a razor edge when it came off that thing. That feels a lot better. All right, so we've taken our straight edge now, and I've got it over on my surface plate. And what I want to do is just kind of get some measurements on this just to see what my grinder's doing. Now, this is pretty much a My grinder will do 24 inches. This is about an 18-inch straight edge, so we're taking a pretty good pass. My grinder's not perfect, I know that. You know, it usually comes out with a couple of, you know, something this big, half to 3/4 of a tenth is kind of what I normally see. So we're going to kind of see what it looks like. So this top surface really doesn't matter, but this was the first surface I ground, so I want to check it. What I've got here is we just got an indicator. This is a tenths indicator, so it's measuring in 10,000ths of an inch. 0.0001 inches is the increments. The big numbers are thousandths. So it's not your typical indicator. Most people are used to working with the thousandths indicator. This one's extremely sensitive. And I've just got it on a little height gauge here that I can sweep across this and hopefully get an idea. So anyway, I've zeroed that out, and we're just going to go across the top. And this surface looks pretty darn good. So, you know, there may be a tenth or so in there. I'm going to call it 2/10. It's varying a little bit on either side of zero across there. It's probably not quite 2/10, but anyway. So that tells me that the grinder's doing a pretty good job that way. Now, one thing I also want to look at is going across it this way. Still looks pretty good. So that surface is within a couple of tenths. Looks great. Now we're going to flip it over. Kind of just wipe that. And put it on this side. We'll come back in with our, see where we're at. And I'm seeing a little bit of across the face. Hang on a minute, let me look at this. Okay, feels like it's sitting pretty flat. So, you know, we got about 1,000th, maybe 1.5 thou going across it this way, which tells me that when I was grinding it, I had those blocks on it, and they were probably pulling it one way or the other, where it wasn't sitting perfectly flat on that bottom. That's not a big deal as long as it's fairly uniform. So, well, let's see, that's about a thou on this side right here, about 1.5 thou there. Thou and a couple of tenths there, and 1 thou and a couple of tenths there. So, you know, it's fairly uniform. So I'm thinking that's just the way it was sitting on the surface grinder. And again, these two sides do not have to be parallel. And sitting on such a narrow bottom, it may be going back and forth. So now what I really want to see is across the face here. So let me kind of come back in here and zero this out. And we're going to sweep across about 4/10. So within a 1/2 thou. And then I'm going to go up here, I'm going to zero, and we'll sweep across. And that side's even flatter. So I'm going to call this, you know, flat to within probably around a 1/2 thou. Again, it's off a little bit in this direction, but it's uniform, so I think it's fine. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with that on my grinder. For my old wore-out grinder, that's actually doing pretty darn good. So next thing I want to do is I'm going to flip this over on the surface plate. Just make sure there's nothing under it. We're going to put it down now. And what I want to do is see where this is hinging at, because this will tell me where my high spots may be. So I'm just going to take it down this end, and I'm going to move it back and forth, and it's fairly clearly it's hinging on this back corner right here. This is the pivot point. So that tells me that's my highest point on that side. And then I'm going to do it again, And okay, so we've got a little bit of flatness issue from one side to the other. And again, that's just telling me that it's where my high spots are. So it's in the two corners, but probably within a half a thou flat all the way across. And not a problem, because that's what we're going to take care of when we scrape it. The good news is that it's already pretty darn flat to start with. I'm not going to have to be hogging off a whole lot of material. So this thing should hopefully scrape in pretty easily. So with that, I think we're pretty much done inspecting this. I'm not worried about this back side back here. That's not a side we'll be referencing from. It's just a machine surface. I could probably put that in some V-blocks and get an idea on this surface, but I'm just going to assume that it's probably similar to the bottom, just based on what the surface grinder is capable of. So we'll know better when we blew it up the first time. All right, so I'm pretty happy with how it looks coming off the surface grinder. This is now ready for scraping, and we're going to do the scraping in another video. I think I'm going to go through the process and actually show you guys how I'm going to scrape this in. And that'll be one, maybe two videos. I'm not sure. It just depends on how long it takes to get the job done. But we'll be bringing that to you soon. I need to get this done so that I can use it over on my lathe. We need this reference surface so that I can actually scrape my ways in. So anyway, on to the next one. We'll see you on the next episode here, and I'll hopefully show you some scraping techniques.